Salvation arrived unexpectedly during Sunday dinner when Sarah's brother Mike stopped by with his boyfriend Derek. Mike took one look at the pile of violation notices Sarah was using as a makeshift placemat and whistled. "Your HOA president sounds like a special kind of nightmare," he commented, helping himself to the pasta that Sarah had made without her usual farm-fresh eggs. "She makes dictators look reasonable," Sarah sighed, explaining the whole saga from initial egg theft to the current administrative assault. "I'm running out of options that don't involve bankruptcy or chicken surrender." Mike, who worked as the head herpetologist at the city zoo, exchanged a meaningful glance with Derek. "Interesting timing," he said, twirling pasta around his fork. "We just had a situation at the reptile house." Sarah's 10-year-old daughter perked up. "Did something escape? Was it a cobra?" "Please say it was a cobra." "Nothing dangerous," Mike laughed. "One of our corn snakes had babies. 14 of them. Beautiful little things, bright orange with striking red saddle markings. Aren't those the ones that look like coral snakes, but are completely harmless?" Sarah asked, remembering her brother's endless reptile facts from childhood. "Exactly," Mike beamed proudly. "Mimicry at its finest. They look intimidating enough to scare off predators, but couldn't hurt a mouse. Well, they could hurt a mouse. That's what they eat, but nothing bigger." Sarah's expression slowly shifted as a deliciously wicked idea formed. "How intimidating are we talking? To someone who, say, doesn't know much about snakes, but thinks they know everything about everything else." Mike caught her tone immediately. His eyes gleamed with the same mischievous spark they'd shared as children planning neighborhood pranks. "Oh, absolutely terrifying to the uninitiated. They're vibrant, they move quickly, and they have a talent for appearing suddenly from small hiding places." "Like nesting boxes?" Sarah asked innocently. "Especially warm, straw-filled spaces like nesting boxes," Mike confirmed. "They're actually drawn to them, and your chickens wouldn't mind at all. Birds and snakes generally ignore each other at this size ratio." Derek, reading the room perfectly, pulled out his phone. "Look, here's a video of the babies from yesterday. Listen to that intern scream when one slithered up his clipboard. He'd been working with snakes for years, and even he jumped 3 feet." The video showed a striking orange snake, barely thicker than a pencil but brilliantly colored, causing a grown man to emit a high-pitched shriek and drop his clipboard as it unexpectedly emerged from beneath a heating pad. Sarah's daughter clapped delightedly. He screamed like a cartoon character. Sarah stared at the video, then at her brother, a slow smile spreading across her face. Hypothetically, she began carefully, if someone were to temporarily relocate some of these harmless but startling snakes to, say, a place where they might surprise an unauthorized visitor. Hypothetically, Mike responded with perfect seriousness. "Such relocations happen frequently in zoological education programs. We often bring snakes to schools, community centers, and private property for educational demonstrations. And if someone had, for instance, an intense but irrational fear of snakes," Sarah continued, "studies show exposure therapy can be quite effective for phobias," Derek offered helpfully, "though the initial shock can be dramatic." The plan came together over dessert, store-bought cookies that paled in comparison to Sarah's usual egg-rich homemade treats. Mike would bring several juvenile corn snakes in a secure carrier, ostensibly for an educational presentation for Sarah's children. They would strategically release the harmless reptiles throughout the chicken coop, focusing on nesting boxes and hidden corners. The timing was perfect. Mike needed to evaluate the snake's educational potential for exactly 24 hours, which gave them a single morning to catch Diane in the act. "Just one question," Sarah said as they finalized the details. "What if she hurts one of them in her panic? I want to teach her a lesson, not endanger innocent snakes." Mike shook his head. "These little guys are surprisingly resilient and incredibly fast. Their first instinct is to flee, not fight, and will be watching the whole time through your trail cam, ready to intervene." The operation launched at midnight. Sarah's children, sworn to absolute secrecy with solemn pinky promises, helped create perfect snake hiding spots throughout the coop. Mike carefully released 8 juvenile corn snakes, each more vibrantly colored than the last, strategically placing them where they'd be most likely to make a dramatic appearance when nesting boxes were disturbed. Sarah spent 48 hours plotting her approach. She documented the theft with meticulous care, taking photos of her empty nesting boxes, noting the exact times eggs disappeared, and even marking her remaining eggs with tiny food-safe dots that would prove ownership if confronted. The monthly HOA meeting provided the perfect battlefield. Sarah arrived early, selecting a front-row seat directly across from Diane's polished mahogany throne at the center of the conference table. She dressed carefully in her hospital scrubs straight from work, a deliberate choice to remind everyone she was a pediatric nurse who saved children's lives while Diane measured brass height with a ruler. When the floor opened for new business, Sarah's hand shot up first. The room went quiet as she stood. "I'd like to report a series of thefts occurring in our community," Sarah began, her voice calm, but carrying to every corner. "Someone has been entering my backyard without permission and stealing eggs from my chicken coop." Before she could continue, Diane's voice sliced through the room like an icicle. "I'd like to redirect this conversation to a more pressing matter." Her French manicured fingers drummed against a suspiciously thick folder. "The illegal livestock operation at 347 Magnolia Drive." A low murmur rippled through the crowd as Diane dramatically flipped open the folder and began passing around glossy, professional-quality photographs of Sarah's chicken coop. Section 7, Paragraph 3 clearly prohibits farm animals, Diane announced with the smug satisfaction of someone springing a carefully laid trap. "These unauthorized chickens create noise disturbances, unpleasant odors, and attract disease-carrying rodents." "That's absolutely false," Sarah countered, her cheeks flushing. "My chickens are quieter than Mr. Peterson's beagle. My coop is cleaned daily, and I've had proper authorization since I moved in." Diane's smile tightened. "I've personally conducted several inspections." "You mean when you were trespassing to steal my eggs?" Sarah interjected. The room went deadly silent, then erupted in shocked whispers. "That's a ridiculous accusation," Diane replied, though her left eye twitched noticeably. "I was merely gathering evidence of code violations, as is my duty as HOA president." Sarah pulled out her phone. "Would you like me to share the photographs of you exiting my property at 6:20 am with a basket full of my eggs? Or perhaps we should discuss how these inspections have been happening daily for 3 weeks, always resulting in empty nesting boxes." The meeting descended into chaos. Neighbors began sharing stories of Diane's increasingly tyrannical rule, the elderly couple forbidden from installing a wheelchair ramp because it disrupted neighborhood aesthetics, the single father fined for having basketball hoop visible from the street, the widow cited for excessive bird feeding. Through it all, Diane maintained her icy composure, tapping her gavel with increasing force. "This is all beside the point," she finally announced. "The previous board negligently granted exceptions that the current board has revoked. You have exactly 2 weeks to remove those chickens, or you'll face daily fines starting at $100. As the meeting adjourned in a buzz of tension, Sarah found herself surrounded by neighbors offering support, yet none willing to openly challenge Diane, whose social and political connections throughout the county were legendary. Even the sympathetic former HOA president whispered, "Be careful, Sarah. Last person who crossed her found their property reassessed at double the value." Sarah drove home with a mounting sense of dread. She'd won the battle of public opinion, but had potentially started a war she couldn't afford to fight. As she checked on her nervous hens that evening, she whispered, "Don't worry, girls. I'll figure something out." What she didn't know was that Diane was already drafting 7 new violation notices to be delivered to Sarah's door the very next morning. Sarah Jenkins' morning ritual had become a twisted game of who got to the eggs first. She'd rush out to her backyard chicken coop at dawn, still in her pajamas and clutching coffee like a lifeline, only to find the nesting boxes mysteriously empty again. Her 4 prized hens, Henrietta, Goldie, Pepper, and Dot, clucked around her feet as if apologizing for a problem that wasn't their fault. "I know you girls are laying," Sarah whispered, checking each nest box twice. "So who's stealing our breakfast?" The thefts had started 3 weeks ago, right after Sarah had won Best Homemade Quiche at the Meadowbrook Estate Spring Festival. Her secret ingredient? The vibrant orange yolks from her heritage breed chickens. Several neighbors had practically begged for her recipe, but one person had notably seethed in the corner during Sarah's modest acceptance speech. Diane Wilcox, the newly elected HOA president, whose store-bought pie hadn't even placed. Sarah had tried everything to catch the egg thief. She'd set up a baby monitor, which only recorded her hen's surprisingly complex midnight conversations, sprinkled flour on the ground near the coop, washed away by overnight rain, and even considered camping out all night before her early morning hospital shift made that impossible. The mystery broke open at 6:17 a.m. on Thursday when Sarah's automatic sprinklers malfunctioned, forcing her to rush outside before her usual coffee. That's when she spotted a slender figure in designer yoga pants and a crisp white blouse, completely impractical for garden work, slipping through her garden gate with practiced stealth. Sarah froze behind her hydrangea bush, watching in slack-jawed disbelief as Diane Wilcox, the same woman who'd sent her 3 violation notices for excessive lawn ornaments. They were carefully curated garden gnomes. "Thank you very much," casually entered her chicken coop. Moments later, Diane emerged with a small wicker basket, now filled with Sarah's eggs carefully nestled in what appeared to be a monogrammed silk handkerchief. Most shocking wasn't the theft itself, but the practiced efficiency with which Diane committed it. This clearly wasn't her first egg heist. As Diane strutted away with her ill-gotten breakfast, she actually checked her designer watch and smiled, right on schedule. Sarah's blood boiled hotter than the forgotten coffee in her mug. She'd just caught the HOA president, the neighborhood's self-appointed rule enforcer, in blatant trespassing and theft. And she had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The morning after the HOA showdown, Sarah opened her front door to find it plastered with violation notices, each in a separate official envelope, each requiring individual appeal procedures with separate filing fees. The charges ranged from unauthorized landscape modifications, her children's butterfly garden, to improper waste container storage. Her recycling bin was visible from certain angles if you stood in exactly the right spot and used binoculars. "She's declared nuclear war," muttered Sarah, tallying up the potential fines. $2,750 in the first week alone. That evening, after putting her kids to bed, Sarah transformed her dining table into a legal war room. She pored over HOA documents until her eyes burned, finally discovering buried in the archives a special exemption for small-scale hen houses, maximum 6 hens, no roosters, that had been properly approved and entered into the permanent record when Sarah had first moved in. Armed with this documentation, Sarah marched to Diane's pristine colonial the next evening. The HOA president answered the door in a silk robe, martini in hand. "I have proof my chickens are authorized," Sarah announced, thrusting the papers forward. "This exemption has no expiration date and was properly recorded." Diane barely glanced at the documents. "That exemption was improperly granted and has been retroactively revoked by executive action of the current board." She sipped her martini. "Is there anything else?" "You can't just make up rules as you go," Sarah protested. "Actually, I can," Diane replied with a razor-thin smile. "It's called interpreting the covenants, and as president, that authority rests with me." The egg thefts not only continued, but became more frequent. Despite her crushing hospital schedule, Sarah invested in a high-definition trail camera, hiding it inside a decorative birdhouse with a perfect view of the coop. The footage it captured was infuriating. Diane now came twice daily, morning and evening, methodically collecting every egg and occasionally rearranging items in the coop to appear more unsightly in her documentation. When confronted with the footage, Diane didn't even blink. "I'm conducting necessary inspections of a code violation," she said smoothly. "And since these chickens shouldn't exist in our community, any eggs they produce are effectively contraband and subject to confiscation." The daily fines escalated, $50, then $75, then $100 per day for willful and continued housing of prohibited livestock. Sarah's mailbox overflowed with citations for increasingly absurd violations: excessive wind chime noise, non-conforming mailbox post angle, unauthorized seasonal decorations, a single ceramic pumpkin in October. Sarah's neighbors watched the battle escalate with a mixture of sympathy and horror. Several secretly dropped off supportive cards with small cash contributions to her chicken defense fund. Others brought casseroles and desserts to replace the meals she could no longer make without her daily eggs. "Just give in," urged her elderly neighbor Mr. Finch. Diane destroyed the Thompsons when they refused to remove their basketball hoop. They ended up selling at a loss just to escape the fines. But Sarah had inherited her grandmother's legendary stubbornness, along with her secret cornbread recipe. "These aren't just chickens," she explained to her supportive but worried children. "They're about whether one person gets to bully everyone else just because she has a fancy title." What began as simple egg theft had escalated into a full-blown neighborhood Cold War. Sarah's bank account was draining. Her legal appeals were mysteriously lost in processing. And Diane had recently been spotted measuring the height of Sarah's grass with an actual ruler and photographing her children's bicycles when left on the front walkway. Something had to break, and soon. Venomous snakies. She has venomous snakies. Call animal control. Call the police. Call the National Guard. A crowd quickly gathered, many still in bathrobes and slippers, drawn by the unprecedented neighborhood drama. Diane, usually so composed, was a spectacular disaster. One shoe missing, pantsuit smeared with authentic free-range chicken evidence, hair disheveled, and mascara running in black rivulets down her flushed cheeks. They're in the nests. Deadly coral snakes. She's keeping dangerous reptiles in a residential area. This is a violation of every code in existence. Sarah approached calmly, Mike and Derek flanking her. Mike reached into the coop and gently retrieved one of the snakes, which immediately curled around his wrist like a living bracelet. "These are corn snakes, Diane," he explained in his best professional zoo educator voice, holding up his ID badge. "Completely harmless. I'm Mike Jenkins, head herpetologist at the Metro Zoo. These are part of our educational outreach program." He stroked the snake's bright orange head. "They're actually beneficial animals, excellent for rodent control, and completely harmless to humans and chickens alike." Sarah stepped forward, phone still recording. "Since everyone's here, I should proudly mention that I've been experiencing theft from my chicken coop. Someone's been trespassing on my property and stealing eggs." She held up her phone. "I have weeks of video evidence showing the perpetrator." The crowd's attention swiveled to Diane, whose expression cycled rapidly through terror, outrage, and horrified realization. That's preposterous," she sputtered, trying to reclaim her dignity while standing shoeless in mud. "I was conducting official HOA inspections." Mr. Finch, the retired judge from 2 doors down, stepped forward in his bathrobe. At 6:20 in the morning, without notice, carrying a basket? That sounds like theft to me, Diane. Mrs. O'Connor, who had served on the original HOA board, nodded firmly. "And I personally approved Sarah's chicken exemption 5 years ago. It has no expiration date and cannot be unilaterally revoked without a 2/3 majority vote." The tide turned visibly as neighbors began sharing their own stories of Diane's petty tyranny. The violation notices for holiday decorations, the fines for garbage cans visible for more than 4 hours, the threats against a cancer patient who couldn't mow his lawn during chemotherapy, Diane's attempts to regain control, invoking bylaws, threatening legal action, name-dropping her husband's law firm, fell on increasingly hostile ears. The final blow came when Derek accidentally played the trail camera footage of Diane's previous egg thefts on his tablet for the gathered crowd. "That's my evidence bag," exclaimed Mrs. Chen, pointing at Diane's monogrammed basket. "The one that went missing from my front porch delivery last month." The ensuing emergency HOA meeting was the most attended in neighborhood history. Diane was not only removed as president, but barred from serving on the board for 5 years. All of Sarah's fines were unanimously cancelled. A new bylaw was even added specifically protecting existing chicken coops with proper exemptions from future harassment. Mike's corn snakes became neighborhood celebrities, starring in an educational presentation at the community center before returning to the zoo. The children named each one after characters from fantasy novels, with the brightest orange one, the first to surprise Diane, christened Justice. Sarah's chicken coop received a small commemorative plaque, home of the brave hens and their slithery defenders, and her egg production finally returned to normal, enough for her family with plenty to share with appreciative neighbors. A sign-up sheet for weekly egg distribution became a neighborhood fixture, with one notable name permanently excluded. As for Diane, she avoided Sarah's street entirely, crossing to the opposite sidewalk whenever necessary. Her husband quietly paid for professional cleaning of the channel suit, a lost cause, and replaced the ruined loafer. 6 months later, they listed their house and moved to a high-rise condominium with stringent rules, but notably, no chicken coops. The story became neighborhood legend, retold at block parties and community gatherings for years afterward. How a simple nurse with a chicken coop, a herpetologist brother, and some harmless but dramatically colored snakes had brought down the neighborhood tyrant and restored peace to Meadowbrook Estates. And to this day, whenever a new HOA board member shows signs of power-hungry tendencies, Diane's BMW pulled up to the curb at exactly 6:17 a.m. Sarah, already on her second coffee and positioned at her kitchen window with a perfect view of the chicken coop, watched through binoculars as the HOA president emerged wearing, incredibly, a cream-colored Channel pantsuit and pristine white leather loafers for her morning egg theft. Who dresses like that to steal eggs? Sarah whispered to Mike, who was monitoring both trail cameras on his tablet. Someone who's never had to deal with actual consequences, he replied, adjusting the camera angle remotely. Her outfit costs more than my monthly salary. They watched as Diane glanced furtively around the still quiet neighborhood before slipping through Sarah's garden gate with practiced ease. Her basket, monogrammed, because of course it was, swung from her perfectly moisturized arm as she approached the chicken coop with the confidence of someone who believed rules applied exclusively to others. The snakes are still in position, Mike confirmed, switching between thermal imaging views of the coop. The little orange one has positioned himself perfectly in the nesting box she always checks first. Sarah's hands tightened around her coffee mug as Diane unlatched the coop door and stepped inside. I almost feel bad, she whispered. She's been stealing from you for weeks and trying to find you out of your home. Derek reminded her from where he stood ready with his phone. Save your sympathy. Inside the coop, Diane moved with businesslike efficiency, heading straight for the prime nesting box, where Henrietta usually laid the largest eggs. She reached inside with manicured fingers, expecting the familiar smooth surface of an egg. What happened next would be witnessed by 17 neighbors, recorded on 4 separate devices, and eventually viewed over 2 million times on social media after Mr. Abernathy's 16-year-old grandson decided it deserved a wider audience. The scream that erupted from the chicken coop registered on a home seismometer 3 houses down. It started as a gasp, escalated to a shriek, and culminated in a glass-shattering wail that had dogs barking in a 3-block radius. The trail camera captured the exact moment when Diane's perfectly composed face transformed into a mask of primal terror as not 1, but 3 vibrantly orange-red snakes slithered up from the straw, one actually brushing against her hand. Snaakes. The word emerged as a banshee wail as Diane backpedaled violently, arms windmilling in cartoon-like panic. Her designer heel caught on the feeding trough, sending her tumbling backward in a spectacular display of flailing limbs and flying designer accessories. She landed with an undignified thud in the fresh chicken droppings Sarah had deliberately left uncleaned, her white outfit now decorated with organic polka dots. But Diane wasn't finished. As she struggled to her feet, a 4th snake slithered across her shoe, triggering another spectacular shriek and causing her to literally leap from the coop, losing a loafer in the process. By this point, lights were flicking on throughout the neighborhood. Sarah calmly walked outside, phone recording, as Diane hopped on 1 foot, frantically wiping at her soiled outfit and pointing wildly at the coop.